Here's a little scenario for you. Personal scenario, comes from my own life. I was actually working in a housing association at the time. I've been there for about a year. Friday lunchtime, come back to my desk, person I'd never met before sitting at my desk. I'd just come back for lunch. And they said, "Are you the data protection person?" And I was like, "Well, Ralph, nice to meet you." They basically said, "Well, great, because there's this thing we've been working on." I said, "Oh, brilliant, what's that? I'd love to be involved." And they said, "Well, it's a new system. It's a cloud implementation. It takes data from here, there, everywhere, uses special category data. We're going to sell some data to some people. We're going to move some data around the globe. We're going to use a number of different suppliers." And I was like, "Great. How can I help?" I said, and they said, one of the meetings is what I said. What do you think the answer I got was? Was it A, every Thursday 9 o'clock? Was the answer B, whenever you can make it, we'll work around you? Or C, oh no, that's all done, it goes live at 5 o'clock today? C's? Yeah, and this is typical, isn't it? This is kind of the typical thing you find. And of course, unfortunately, I then had to react. My reaction was it A, no, this must all stop now. We can't do it. I haven't looked at this. B, I'll tell you what, we'll do a DPAA and call it done. Let's paper over the cracks a bit. Or C, that's it, I'm out of it. But this is not an atypical situation, is it? This is not an atypical situation. And it started me really thinking, what can I do about this? What can I do about this? Am I always the last man in? So I said to the individual, I said, well, how long have you been working on this? They said, a couple of 3 years. I said, well, why wasn't I asked before? And they said, well, because we thought you'd say no. And that got me thinking, right? It got me thinking because I was like, number one, if they thought I was going to say no, surely they should have come and talked to me earlier. I think that's fair enough to say. But number two, I kind of had to look at myself in the mirror. I had to kind of say, am I my own worst enemy? Am I the no person, right? Am I the person who walks around the building espousing how important data protection and privacy is and hitting people with a no bat and stopping the business from working? I think if you look at our new data protection and digital innovation bill and all of the workings that we see in there from the government, it certainly takes the opinion that this horrible EU GDPR thing is something that is a barrier to innovation, something that's going to stop businesses from working. And to me, there's a fundamental perception problem, right? There's a fundamental perception problem that in the way the organization sees the data protection community. There's a fundamental communication problem. And I don't want to be the one who, when I'm walking down the corridor, is people are running out of the way from in case I hit them with a no bat, right? I don't want to be there. And I've been running an IAPP CIPM course the last couple of days, and I was sort of asking people, why do you do what you do? Like, how does the management view you? And the responses I was getting was mostly the same. The management kind of look at them as some sort of insurance policy, like, we don't want to get regulatory penalties, so we've got to have you there. Isn't that a horrible way to run your job? This kind of person that the organization doesn't really want, but has to have just in case they get a fine or a penalty. And now I know in the UK the chances of fines and penalties are quite small at the moment due to our current commissioner's stance. But even so, it makes me think whether that gives us job security, right? If, that suddenly our managers cotton on to the fact that they might not get a regulatory penalty, and if that's the reason we're there, do we still have a job? It's an interesting thing to think about. We're a legal requirement. We're a cost to the business. Something that's going to slow the business down. I've often been accused of being the brakes on the car. The thing that's going to stop the car. The thing that's going to be the brakes. And to me, that's interesting because I don't want to be the brakes. I don't want to stop the car, right? Without good brakes, you can't go fast in safety, by the way. I just think I'd add that in there as well. So really this started me on the thinking of who I wanted to be as a professional. who did I want to be as a professional and how did I want to pitch myself? And this thing is, I didn't want to be the blocker. Yeah? I didn't want to be the one who stops the innovation, who says no, who puts the pause on the project, who stops the business from achieving their goals. And that's often the way we in data protection are perceived. So can it be a win-win? Yeah? Or does it always have to be negative sum? Are we always going to be the ones suggesting controls that slow down and stop? And it's been my privilege over the years to work for organizations both large and small and see a different range of maturities. Yeah, see a different range of maturities. And I think that housing association I was working in definitely sat on the lower end of that maturity scale. So on the lower end of that maturity scale, we would see data protection teams involved late, sometimes not at all. Yeah. So it would be when the system was launched or when the project was going live, we better check in with the data protection team. And to me, that's too late. Yeah? It's too late. Well, what's our ability to make change once the software is purchased, once the system is embedded in the organization, once the project is up and running and personal data is running through it? Well, our ability to make change is pretty damn low. And so we can't add the value we want to add. But it's a tick box exercise, so it's fine, right? We're box tickers, legal compliance. And data protection is actually seen as an external threat within those organizations. And what I mean by that is I'd look at a corporate management risk register from the board, and it would say risk, data protection. And I'd think about that. I'd think, is data protection our risk? Because they're thinking about it in risk of harm to the business, risk of non-compliance, risk of fine, risk of threat. To me, data protection was the way of managing your risks, managing your data compliance, adding value to the data, making the way we manage data and our records within the organization better. It always kind of rankled with me seeing data protection written there as a risk. And also seen as a legal compliance activity. And to me, you know, and no offense to the lawyers in the audience, I know I've got one over here, sorry. I always found looking at things as a legal exercise sometimes a little bit damaging. I would get frustrated very much in the way that, for example, we spent a long time looking at things like international transfers, or we spent a long time looking at vendor agreements. And we'd spend a long time going through them, redlining them, making sure everyone was happy, and we'd both sign off on either end. We were great, we've got the contract in place there. But no one ever really asked, well, how are they changing as a result of it? What are they doing differently? How is this actually practically protecting the data subject at the end of the day? How is this practically protecting the individual? Or is this just paperwork? Yeah? The government says we should get rid of DPAAs because DPAAs are needless EU paperwork. You know, I'm not sure I disagree with them in some ways, because the way I see DPAAs often used in organization is later in the game. It's, oh, we've got this new system, do a DPAA to make it okay legally. Papering over the cracks. And I get very frustrated with that, you know, that we're achieving nothing. We've got no real actions. And therefore we're seen as this sort of negative, we're trying to stop the business, we're saying no, we're actually acting against the functionality, against the needs of the business. And that means that data protection is often perceived as a cost or a problem. Cut to higher maturity businesses. Now, it's been actually my privilege to work with a couple of large international businesses who are being software design. I mentioned the name of a fruit-based company earlier, who actually really do believe and invest in data protection and privacy. Other vendors are available. Okay? And they've got a very different view. In their organization, data protection is not seen as a risk or a threat or something that's going to cause a detriment to the business, but actually as features and functionality that will add value to the product. What I mean by that, if you can imagine for those people who have done subject access requests, anyone here done subject access requests? A few people, yeah? Fun? Costly? Time consuming? Yeah. Takes a bit of time, doesn't it, to work your way through authenticating someone, communicating with them, finding the data, getting the data back, redacting the data, sending the data out. Well, there's another possibility. The individual could log in and press a button. So when I talk about technology being the problem and also being the solution. Automating rights requests, building in data protection and features and functionality within the product. But of course that means we've got to get in early. Yeah? We've got to find out about things early. We've got to have those interventions almost before the thing is purchased, before the thing is built, as a designer, as a design concept. And that's really interesting for me because that means that we're no longer seen as that sort of problem stopping the thing that's already been bought. We can actually be seen as a solution. Yeah. Getting in there early, adding features and functionalities to products. And I see those high maturity organizations now even taking it a step further, where they're actually advertising using data protection. Anyone seen the adverts on TV from companies, And again, I'm going to use that fruit-based company as an example. A couple of people nodding. They don't speak at once. I know there's not many of us in. I know we had a late night last night. So the idea of those sort of adverts is to say, and you think about those companies, especially those technology companies, they could be saying, what do they build? They build a phone, let's say. So they could be saying in advertising, I've got a better megapixel camera than my competitor. I've got bigger storage than my processor, right? I've got better network coverage than my competitor. I mean, that's what these phones actually do. But I find it interesting that they're now advertising, and this is a conscious choice to spend their marketing dollars, to say to their consumer, we'll keep you safe. Yeah. As a reminder, it doesn't say in the GDPR, protect your privacy. It says rights and freedoms, all the way through, right? Rights and freedoms. Not only privacy, right to life, right to a free and fair vote, non-discrimination, all of these kind of good things. And so to me, the idea of moving away from a legal compliance, away from a paperwork exercise, and much more down the technology road as a builder, as someone who's going to add functionality and put the human and the user experience back at the center of data protection, back at the center of product design, well, we can only then be seen as a benefit, as an advantage. It means we don't come to the organization with problems, we come to the organization with solutions. We're seen as a value add. Someone they want to work with, not somebody they avoid. And I see that sort of difference in maturity. And so the next question is, well, how do we go from one to the other? How do we go from those organizations that see data protection in one way to organizations that see data protection another way? Because they often say the hardest thing is cultural change, isn't it? The hardest thing is how we deliver and interface and talk with the management.